Welcome to In the Ven Zone with Christine McKay, where we get candid about what it takes to negotiate effectively. You'll learn from the challenges and successes of entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. We help you change the nature of your negotiations and get more from every deal you do.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of In the Ven Zone, where we help you, the small business owner, level the playing field in your negotiation. And we do that by bringing you amazing guests who have very interesting and sometimes very unusual backgrounds, but always have fabulous stories to help you learn about different ways to negotiate every day in your business. And as we often say, and as you've heard me say, if you've listened and tuned in before, you know, and if you haven't tuned in before, then you'll hear it for the first time. Negotiation is nothing more than a conversation about a relationship, and you cannot win in a relationship. Well, today's guest may have slightly different view on some aspects of that quote, because he is an actual Olympic athlete. Yes, indeed. He rode in the 2004 Athens Olympic Games. And he's been a friend for a long time. He is an amazing guy. He graduated from George Washington University a few years ago with a degree in physics, but he now actually works for just a really cool company that is just tearing it up right now. He currently works for Hydrow, the company that does in-home rowing machines, which I have and I absolutely love. He started there as a featured athlete, but is now their senior infrastructure engineer. He is out of Boston, Massachusetts, actually lives with his wife and his two adorable kids in Ipswich, north of Boston. And I am so excited to have him here to talk about negotiation, kind of in a little bit different way. We're going to talk about some of the lessons. He has some really cool stories about when he was training for the Olympic team and was on the U.S. national team, things that he negotiated with his coach. And then we'll bring that all back into business and all that good stuff. So Aquil, so glad to have you here. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here to see if I can up my negotiation game.
So tell us a little bit more about your background and how you've ended up where you're at right now.
Yeah. So I started in Washington, D.C. As a little zygote. Is it zygote? No, not that far back.
One of the two.
Okay. Okay. No, I grew up in Washington, D.C. And, went to high school there, and I went to George Washington University there. And so basically as related to my sports life, my first negotiation was really with my mother. I was headed out the door for senior beach week, which is where, like high school seniors go to the beach for the week. And I hadn't yet committed to where I was going to go to college, whether I was going to play football or whether I was going to row. And she's standing at the bottom of the stairs and she's like, "You're not leaving the house until you decide where you're going to school next year." And so maybe this really isn't a negotiation, but I knew that there was a bunch of beer in the trunk of the car that I didn't want her to see. So I said, "I'm going to row." So maybe that's her negotiating with me. I don't know how that works, but no. So I decided to row in college, and that was sort of set me on a trajectory. Little did I know that would be my ticket to the Olympic Games. I enjoyed sports and science, and that's sort of where my head was. But that's sort of my story. And then after the Olympics, I moved to Boston, where I met you and a bunch of other friends who would, soon become my new tribe, and worked for a little startup there. And we were acquired by Microsoft. And then I sort of big companies, that sort of really wasn't my bag. I really like small companies where you can feel as though you make an impact. And so I left there, went to a company called Cargometrics, basically just, more engineering there. It's funny, I've done very little physics since
I noticed that.
since college, but But then one day I got a call from a guy, Bruce Smith, that I knew from community rowing here in Boston. And he was like, "Hey, you want to meet up for lunch? I've got this idea for that we're starting out a rowing machine and all of this." And I was like, that sounds kind of cool. I'll come and check it out. But at the time, we had just had our second child, and I couldn't really wrap my mind around the whole thing because I was coming from the perspective of being an elite rower, not
Mm,
understanding how we expand rowing to the masses.
ah,
And anyway, so Hydrow was persistent, and like a year later, we just brought up a conversation again, and I started rowing there just one day a week. Let's just come down one day a week, shoot an episode one day a week. Work one workout a week. And then by the fall, I was like, this company is going places and doing some incredible things, and I really love the message of community that they're bringing
mm,
and sort of the relationships that they're helping to build, and I really wanted to be a part of that. So yeah, that's how I
that's
came to
awesome.
be at
I have to,
Hydro.
yeah, I have to say, I mean, I got my Hydro a little while ago, and I absolutely love it. And you didn't actually know that Keith, my husband, is he was a rower, and he rowed
Yeah,
for Northeastern.
yeah.
And he's like, "Can you ask Akil to make sure that I can shut everybody off?" To be on a row. But I just really love it. And he taught me how to row a few years ago on a machine,
Mm,
obviously on an erg. And I fell in love. It's
yeah.
like such a great workout, and it's such an amazing. So if you haven't, for any of our listeners who haven't checked out Hydrow, just go to hydrow.com. And people ask me Peloton or Hydrow, and I'm like, get the Hydrow first. And then if you still feel you need a Peloton, then get the Peloton, but do the Hydrow first, because it's an awesome piece of equipment, and you kick everybody's butt. So, as a matter of fact, all of the instructors are just phenomenal. So it's really good. I need to get more into the community side of it, but I still I'm still kind of feeling my way through it. So, but let's talk a
Good
little
stuff.
bit about how, kind of going back into
Mhm,
that time when you were training, and you
mhm.
told me this just great, what I thought was a crazy story, because it's like you don't think about an Olympic athlete. I mean, when I think about an Olympic athlete, because you're the only, well, actually, I know two Olympic athletes now that I think about it. I know somebody who won the gold medal in women's soccer
There you go.
in Atlanta. I actually have a picture of me wearing her gold medal, actually. Her name is Mary Harvey. I should try to get her
Okay.
on the show. She was also the first woman who was a director for FIFA.
Oh, there you
Yeah,
go.
yeah, she's kind of the thing. She's all that. She's pretty awesome. So at any rate, but you told me this story because I think about Olympic athletes, and all I think is that you guys eat, sleep, drink, everything is all about the sport. But you made some interesting plays with your
Mhm,
coach.
mhm.
And one of the things I didn't share when I read your bio is Akil is an accomplished saxophonist. And you told me this awesome story about how you negotiated with your coach so that you could stop practicing for a month and go play
Yeah.
sax professionally. Tell us more about that, because I thought that was such a great story.
Yeah, yeah. So I've played the saxophone ever since junior high school. And, I had played around when I was training in Princeton, New Jersey. I connected with this group of guys in Philadelphia. And it just so happened that they were opening up for G Love and the Special Sauce.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah. And so they got, Garrett said, "Hey, can you guys, be one of the opening acts?" And I was like, "Well, that was a rare opportunity." And I
Mm,
still wanted to go to the Olympics. And I think that one of the dynamics that you have in any negotiation, like you said, it's a relationship. And so
mhm.
a lot of times as an athlete, your coach has sort of a, a power that
Right.
you grant them,
Hmm.
basically, over your life, and especially in places where you are selected, you know.
Hmm.
You're taking a risk if you deviate from sort of what is the norm. So I basically knew that I wanted to do this, and I knew that I wanted to keep training, and so um, I went to my coach. I had no idea how the conversation was going to turn out, but it turned out better than I expected. Basically, he was like, this is your life. These are your dreams. Do what you feel like you need to do. And, if you come back and you're still competitive, then you keep training.
Mm-hmm.
If not, then, maybe you're off to go play music, who knows. So there was a risk that was there for me. That was, and I didn't really know if I wanted to take that risk. But in the end, I decided, you know what, I can train. I've got a long athletic career ahead of me, and I can take, this is the time for me to take that risk.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing that sort of just really stuck out to me from that meeting, it actually gave me confidence to have hard conversations with people who I deemed as having, authority or decision-making abilities, or that directly affected me.
Oh gosh, there's so much in that. So one of the things that I talk about a lot is what I affectionately call David and Goliath negotiation. So I do a lot of work with smaller companies who are negotiating with major corporations, and I look for ways to help them level the playing field. And one of the things that you just said a whole lot of things in there. So one was kind of, I also talk about how the hardest part of any negotiation is the negotiation we have between our ears.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to have that negotiation. Was this the right time? Could you continue to pursue the dream of, going to the Olympics and competing in rowing while pursuing this really kind of cool thing, to play saxophone? So there was that element. The notion of power in negotiation is massive. And it turns out that my consulting clients are almost exclusively minority or women-owned businesses. And it kind of goes, I suppose it goes to stand because I'm all about leveling the playing field, that I do a lot more work giving people voice that don't necessarily feel that they have voice of their own. What were some of the things that you did in that discussion to prepare yourself for that discussion? So you said you weren't really sure how it was going to play out, but if you can think back to that time, what were some of the things that you told yourself that you did to prepare yourself for what might happen? Because the coach could have just as easily said, yeah, you go do that and you're off the team, because there's 100 people standing in line waiting for somebody to fail so that they can take their place. So how did you manage that dynamic in your own head?
There was a lot going on. I think one was that I spoke to other people. I spoke to my mother, who is, one of my great counselors. I also I spoke to some other athletes, and I think that what I said to myself is that, is there any way that I come back to rowing, and it doesn't quite look like what it looks like now, but it's still something that I could live with, right? So like maybe it was that I come back, I'm off my game, I don't make the national team this year, but I'm still on a trajectory to go to the Olympics.
Okay.
Is that something that I can live with? Is that an outcome that I can live with? So I going back, I thought about some of the outcomes, and I said, okay, well, like even saying going to my coach, does that now in his eyes make him think that I'm less committed to this endeavor, to which people are basically turning down every other, other
Sure.
options in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lucky because we had a coach who he said, he once said to us, like, I don't want to be anyone's everything. He says, like, I want, like if I have to cut a guy, I want him to have other things that he can do so that this experience, when it ends, it's only rowing. And
Right.
so, part of me going into this discussion, this negotiation,
Mm-hmm.
was also knowing who I was having the negotiation with.
Yes.
And that's a big part of it. When you're going in blind, you have a lot of guesswork that you have to do.
Yep. And
So I
that,
think that the conversations that I had in my head were around basically making sure that I was prepared for the possible outcomes,
mm-hmm.
And also I think the most consequential of which was me being perceived as less committed, like, because then that affects other decisions that are made by your coaches.
Right. Right.
Um, so yeah, so that's sort of, I talked to other people. I tried to make sure that my relationship, as you said, with my coach was one in which I could feel empowered, even though in some ways I felt powerless.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's the stuff that's up in your head,
Right.
and that's sort of how I went about it.
There are a few, I mean, this is really good because this is like feeds into a lot of the things that we've talked about on the show before, and that I talk about when I do training programs, and that I practice when I'm negotiating. And so one of the things that people often do not do very well, and in fact, I spoke at an event last week, and the host of the event, after she heard me speak, she's like, I wasn't sure how the topic of negotiation was going to play out. She goes, but I really learned a lot. She goes, I really learned for the first time about my counterpart. And for me, I'm like, what? That's like so far that would be something that somebody who's, later in her career would actually go, oh, I have to think about my counterpart. But that's exactly what you did. You're like, how do I think about my coach? How do I think about how he's going to respond? What are the potential options, right? And what does that all mean? How does my relationship come into play? And you have another story from when you were on the Olympic team where you actually negotiated to change your training up
Mhm.
because you were rowing in the winter. And it is kind of ironic to a certain extent that you're correct. So this story is amusing
Yeah.
because of the company that Aquil currently works for, doing in-home rowing machines. But you negotiated to change up your training routine, to go train at Lake Placid with
Yeah.
I think the cross country ski team one year. Tell us
Yeah.
how that works, because that also had to come into play. Because it's a very different type of
Mhm.
training. And I intuitively, I think that there would be a lot of benefits to that. But how did you position that? And was that before or after you did the,
Right. I have to think that might have been before.
okay.
But this negotiation was a bit different in that I was, oddly enough, as you said, I was burnt out of of rowing on the rowing machine, and I mean, it wasn't a Hydrow. To be fair,
To
it
be
was
fair,
not a
it was the
Hydrow.
concept too,
Yeah,
I'm sure.
yeah, yeah.
They're not very good cars.
Um,
I drove one.
and I just didn't feel like I was making much progress.
Mhm.
And so I was talking to my coach, and I was just like, I'm not performing at the level I want to be performing at. And it turned out it was the canoe kayaking teams that I went to train with.
Okay.
And they were training in Lake Placid. And in the winter, they cross country ski. And so I didn't know that cross country skiing was going to be the outcome of this conversation. But once again, I had to empower myself to be able to have a conversation with my coach to say that this isn't working for me in a situation where all the other athletes are doing it. Why isn't it working for you? And he said, well, you can go train with the canoe kayaking team and go cross country skiing and lift weights. And since all I would be doing for the winter anyway was, like lifting weights and rowing on the on the erg, there's not a whole lot of difference there. And I think that once again, for me, there were a number of instances in my career that I didn't view as negotiations,
Mm-hmm.
but in essence they were, and there was risk involved in them, and I had to be able to understand the risk. And for me, like, it's hard because if I don't, if I can't, I think that's the right brain side of me. Like, if I can't understand all of the risk, I have a hard time. And I know that I don't understand all of the risk, but if I
Mm-hmm.
don't understand what I think is a sufficient amount, I have a hard time moving. I have a hard time making that leap.
Mm-hmm.
So in both of these cases, I felt like I had sufficient enough information to warrant like taking the risk. For this particular case, I went in, and this is actually a really good story because when I was in college, this same coach, he'll never admit this, but he said to me, "No, you will never make the national team. You're too small." And and I did. I mean, he
And I
says,
mean,
"Nah,
and I
nah,
have to, and I know Akil, no, small is not a word that you would use to, the average person would use to define Akil. Just,
yeah."
I'm just throwing that out there.
So he said, it was just funny because here I am talking to this guy who is now the coach, and basically has like a lot of control over sort of like my destiny. And
Mhm.
so I once again sort of went through that whole process, and uh, once again the outcome was far better than I could have expected. I came back, I pulled some of my best scores ever, and it was sort of just that change that sort of helped me to reboot at a time when I felt like I needed it.
I like how, I like kind of the process that you naturally went through is that you got clear on what it is that you wanted. You figured out a way to ask for it, and then you delivered against the results that you committed to, that there was a commitment on your end, so you
Right,
knew what your coach needed in order for you to continue to move forward training with the team, and
right,
then you delivered that.
right.
And so when I do training, I talk about the importance of getting clear on what it is that you want, why it's important to you, understanding what your counterpart needs, knowing how to ask in a way that's intentional, and then making sure that everybody lives up to what they said that they were going to do. And
Yeah,
that essentially right there, that's it. That's
yeah,
the whole negotiation process. And you did that regularly. And I'm interested because you said a couple things in terms of getting comfortable. One of the things you said was being comfortable asking hard questions, right? When we're in relationships, and whether you and I are both married, my husband and I've been married for, Christ, we're coming up on 30 years almost now, and I'm still head over heels in love with the man. And so
oh,
it is. It's adorable. I mean, it makes my kids
tell
gaggle.
Keith I said hello, by the way.
I will tell him you said hello. He told me to tell you hello. But it's like we we sometimes we tell ourselves that having a hard conversation is going to hurt the relationship, when what really hurts the relationship is avoiding the hard conversation. Because a great relationship isn't about avoiding conflict, it's about dealing with conflict constructively. And so one of the things that you have done that you did in your training experience was doing that, taking a situation where you felt you didn't necessarily have no power, you did have some power and you did have some leverage, otherwise the outcome would have been different. But you figured out what that looked like, and you used it judiciously, and you figured out what your alternatives could be, and could you live with those outcomes. You figured out, you just had this kind of natural inclination for how you did that. Now, how has that translated for you into your professional world?
Mm. Well, all of this has been kind of interesting in that, I'm going to name drop someone else in this negotiation realm, Chris Voss.
Yep.
When he used to live near my parents down in DC. And when I had finished my rowing career, I had to make a decision about what I was going to do next. And I had the option of going to work in Philadelphia, in finance, or coming up to Massachusetts to work in sort of the scientific tech startup space. And there were two deals that were on the table for me, and I had to try to figure out which one was right for me. Now, as good as I feel like I was negotiating and advocating for myself when it came to sports, I was totally like, I didn't know the business world as much. So there wasn't I didn't have the knowledge of my counterpart the way that I did with sport,
Right.
And so I had to, I was counseled by Chris on trust, knowing my own value, and knowing what it is that I wanted to get out of it. So those are all skills that I had from my like negotiation in terms of sport. But the difference was that I didn't know the counter side of that as well. I mean, I knew the people that I interviewed with, I knew the businesses, but I didn't sort of know how I was the other side of that is like, I wasn't sure of my value.
Right.
If you ask me like to sit down and row, and like, I know that value, I had that confidence in my value, but when it came to business, I now had to try to translate that into knowing my value in this other sphere, And it's one of those situations where people talk a lot about, how sport, there's all of these great lessons in that you get from sport. And yes, they're there, but how do they then translate to sort of the next phase of your life? And so it's easy to miss the ability to translate that if you don't have someone, I think, sometimes to walk you through that.
I was just going to ask you. So, in addition to Chris, so our listeners know, because not everyone knows Chris. So Chris Voss is the author of Never Split the Difference. He is a retired FBI hostage negotiator, not just any FBI hostage negotiator. He was the head of the FBI's negotiation team. And his book, Never Split the Difference, highly recommended. Excellent book. Lots of really good things in there. Chris, if you listen to this, I really want to meet you. I think he and I would have a really great conversation. I think we both have things we could learn from each other. But in addition to Chris and having America's leading the world's leading FBI hostage negotiator telling you about that, how did you telling you to go figure out what your value is? How did you figure that out? What are the things that you did in addition to talking to Chris?
Right. So like that, like you said, like me knowing my value is not about like there's no,
Nope.
no one can give you that.
That's right.
And so it was really thinking about more of, for me, what it is that I wanted and the work that I was willing to do. So I could go to, the world of finance and say, look, I studied physics, I know math, but like, that's what I bring. And I have hard work, like, I know I can work hard, coming up here, I know physics. I know that this platform that you're building is about, math and physics, and I can guarantee you that I can give you that hard work. So the value that I had to find in myself was that there were a lot of things that I didn't know at the negotiation table with these respective opportunities. But what I did know was that I could work hard, and that I could, I would work tooth and nail to deliver what it is that I agreed to deliver. And so that, knowing that ability of myself, gave me the ability to sort of walk in and say, okay, what is my value, and also knowing what the value is out there, right? Because as an employer, you can look at things as in a couple of ways. You can say, what is the market value for this position, and what is the experience that this person brings to the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can make decisions about
Right.
that. Or you say, like, this is what we're willing to pay the person for this job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can value that position, right?
Right.
And so, as a prospective employee, I had to say, all right, well, this is what I know the market looks like, and this is what I think my value is, and what I actually need to be able to thrive in this environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I had that in place, I was able to, even though I still didn't have that, the knowledge of who was on the other side of the table, I had enough knowledge to sort of make a decision.
Yeah, and when I did, so some of the audience know I actually was very blessed and fortunate to have attended Harvard University to get my MBA. And a few years after I graduated, I did career advising work at HBS, as we call Harvard Business School. And not everybody knows,
Sorry.
not every, to heck with you. But one of I remember this one student who, he was an engineer. He had worked for Schlumberger on an oil platform in the Middle East. And, that's what he did. And he was, that was all he knew. And he wanted to go work in pharmaceutical industry.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone was like, and he was a challenging, he had a challenging kind of demeanor about him. He was very kind of gruff, and it was really hard to for a lot of people. He went through a lot of career coaches, and people couldn't figure out how to help him. And I just kind of put a negotiation hat on, and he's like, well, I'm being told that nothing in my background matches. I can't, there's nothing that working on an oil platform in the Middle East doesn't get me closer to pharmaceuticals. And I will never forget this. I said, well, that makes no sense to me, because they use petroleum products to manufacture pharmaceuticals. So we can make a case, we can figure out what that storyline is. And that's exactly what we did. And not only did he landed an amazing job at Eli Lilly in France. I mean, it was awesome.
Right.
But we created that storyline. So what is that kind of common ground, and how do you figure, and we created, what does his value look like as a result of working in what did that do for him? And I'll never forget that story. I actually just gave myself goosebumps just remembering that story.
It's a great story.
It's like, because
I want to go into chicken farming. Go.
There you go. Well, physics, cows shit and it goes, or chickens go poop and it falls on the ground. The thing, and that's the thing that I love about negotiating. Like, really good negotiators, like I often have, speaking of chickens, I often have an egg, a raw egg that I hold, and I'm like, you have 3 people who want this one egg, and that's it. You've got one egg. How do you get it amongst 3 people? Right? And almost everybody says, well, you boil it and you cut it up, or you scramble it and split it up, or make an omelet and split it up. I'm like, well, you could just take a pin and poke a hole in the bottom of the egg, drain the yolk and the white, separate the yolk from the white, and you have 3 separate parts of the egg of equal value. If it's a fertilizable, if it's an egg that you could also incubate it, hatch the darn thing, and make more eggs. And I mean, it's like, so they're just like, the thing about negotiation is that it's all about possibilities. It's all about the possibilities. And when you're looking at a job and whether, or you're looking to get a new customer or a new supplier or an investor, I mean, Hydrow, you guys have done a number of investment rounds, I believe. And, it's like, whenever you're looking for new investors, it's like, what's that story? What's that thread that you can, that is a true and real and consistent with who you are, that message of who you are, that you can bring to that table? Because that stuff matters in every negotiation, because no matter what anyone says, you're never negotiating with a company.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you're negotiating a $10,000 deal, or the largest deal I've ever done is $2.4 billion. And so the process of negotiating a $10,000 deal or your job is the same as negotiating a $2.4 billion transaction. So it's the same. And so what you've just highlighted is essentially that, figuring out that value. You have to know your value in any negotiation, no matter what it is that you're negotiating, whether it's your job or something else.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
It's crazy because I think that, that is something that I intuitively knew in sport, but I didn't know in business. But it was only because I had never asked myself that question before. I never really had to make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people, like that is something that you're constantly gaining knowledge. You're constantly gaining new experience. And it's definitely something that people should think about,
Everything we do, like somebody, one way of thinking about it is every negotiation is a communication. Not every communication is negotiation, but every negotiation is communication.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think, and for, at least for me and our philosophy at Venn Negotiation, is that it really is about relationship. And you can't win in a relationship. Like even when, like, if you, oh, now I forgot to ask you the story about the 0.03 second miss of,
yeah.
I'm going to come back to that. But when you're negotiating, when you're in a team, when you're part of a team, right, and somebody gets sick or somebody's having a really struggle of a day, and how you lift each other up is how the whole boat goes.
Yeah.
I imagine. I mean, just like in any team activity I've been, if you're lifting each other up. And when you're negotiating in business, you're in a negotiation because you think you're better off as a result of doing the negotiation. And if that's the case, and you both feel that way, then it's a way to lift each other up.
Mm-hmm.
But tell us a little bit about the story of you missing.
That's a dark. You're taking me to a dark place. Dark.
Yeah.
No, so I was, this goes into a lot of sort of, I was on track to be to make it to the 2000 Olympics, and everything was looking like it was firing on all cylinders. I basically had to go to a race. I had been beating people all year who were competing. Then I think probably a month out, a guy got cut from the team who was pretty good, but he didn't get cut. I think he made a decision that what was happening wasn't working, and he decided to row in the single. And so we had basically Olympic trials, and we had our first race that I won. We had a second race. I have asthma, and so I had an asthma attack, and he won that one. And then we went to a runoff, and I lost by 33/100ths of a second. And it's crazy just to think about, like every time I breathe, I'm like, man, I could have been at 2000 Olympics, just on the other side of that, it was a pretty hard hit, because there's a lot of hype. I felt like I let people down. This was supposed to be my moment, and I had to negotiate my way out of that hole that I was in after that. And like, once again, that's a conversation you have in your head. Why am I doing this? Should I continue? Should I go on? Woe is me. The whole thing was pretty wild. but definitely something that this has been my coach, oddly enough, I was standing down at the dock, and he was like, my mother and everything was down there. And he said, look down the dock, and he says, your parents still love you. And I was just like, like, yeah, I didn't want to hear it, but it's true. We create these narratives in our head and about what the expected outcome should be. And that limits our ability to see what the expected outcome could be.
So one of the guests that was on the show, and actually I'm doing some collaboration with him, is a gentleman named Blair Dunkley. And he does a lot of work and has for a number of decades now on mind models. And he talks about one of the things that hangs us up is that we should be looking, or not should, he would actually go, don't say should. But one way of kind of changing the narrative that we have is to look for things that are externally verifiable. So your coach was essentially saying to you, look for the externally verifiable things to determine your value and your worth versus the internally verifiable things. Because, and this goes back to the job situation too, because at the end of the day, our brains will always tell us that we're not worthy. And because and that we shouldn't try, and that we shouldn't try to do more, and that we should just sit and like be content where we're at. And that's our brain doing what it's supposed to do, which is protect us and keep us breathing and alive and keep us safe. And one of my favorite quotes was when I was training in martial arts, and one of my martial arts instructors used to say that as human beings, we're kind of screwed, because we're comprised mostly of water and electricity, and and electricity seeks the path of least resistance, and water seeks its lowest level. So when we let that talk in our head, that internal component, determine who we present ourselves and who we are externally, instead of relying on externally verifiable information to reinforce who we are, that's a significant part of what draws us down and causes us not to ask for more of what we want and expect more from ourselves and from others around us.
So I've got a question for you.
Yes.
So that sounds amazing. What if you are in a situation where you don't see the externally verifiable things? Like, let's say you're in an abusive situation, or because like for me, as someone, I'm like, like right now working on diversity, equity, and inclusion in rowing.
Right.
And we have kids that come from traumatic experience, know? So how, if you are trying to see externally verifiable things and everything around you is telling you that, or not everything, but there are major influences telling you that, not giving you that ability to value, how do you deal with that?
So, I mean, I can from my own experience. So I don't know if you know this about me. So I was an unwed teen mom. I was living in the back of my car, homeless. I was on welfare for almost 10 years in an abusive marriage, and decided I wanted a different life for myself. And so I negotiated one. And so I went through some of the things that you're talking about. Obviously, a completely whitewashed experience in terms of the fact that I'm white. And so that definitely, that privilege existed. But it also, to the best of my knowledge, nobody's ever gone from being homeless, having 3 kids, and graduating from a Harvard MBA after being on welfare for almost a decade. And I don't think anyone's done it. Nobody did it before me, and nobody's done it since. So I think the biggest thing is doing what you're doing, is surrounding yourself with people who believe in you more than you do at the moment that's necessary. And you are that person for these kids. And so when I look back and people ask me, how did you get out of that situation? That's what I say. I happened along people. It wasn't like I went out looking for them. It was like they found me. And they believed in me more than I believed in myself at that moment. And they lifted me up and helped me see something in myself, not right away, but that reinforcement that mattered, and it was cumulative. And the more people I had in my world who told me that I was good, that I was good at something, and that I was worth something, the more value I saw in myself.
Mm.
And
I had to write all that down. Sorry, I was taking
yeah,
notes.
it for me, mentorship is one of the most important things in the world to me. I mean, I can literally point to certain people who changed my life simply by a sentence that they said to me.
Mhm.
And and so so to me, like the kids that you're working with, and I think the work that you're doing is amazing, and I think we need so much more diversity in every aspect of the world, and certainly in rowing, but everything. And I think what you're doing is you are fulfilling that role for these kids in these traumatic situations, and that matters. And that's where we start helping people ask for more. And I mean, in California, one of the things that I do love about living here is that, like in job situations, it's no longer legal in California for an employer to ask you what your past salary was.
Mm.
That should be a national law, in my opinion. That should never that should never come into play on what a company sees as the value of the work of that role,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
right. And so I think that it's, as we, at least for me, as I as I've gotten older and progressed in my career, for me, it's about being that person like you are. I work in a couple of nonprofits where we do mentorship and, mentoring young adults, as well as I mentor single moms. And that is part of where that starts, is reinforcing to everybody. I think somebody told me there's like a 1 in 14 trillion chance that you and I are who we are right now at this moment in time.
Wow.
Every person is truly unique and worthy of doing amazing and great things. And when we actually, I was just talking to somebody just a little bit ago. They did a study in Asia. I think it was in Korea. It was either in Korea or Japan. And they had a bunch of women come in and take a math test. And 15 minutes before they took the math test, these women were told, "You're women aren't good at math, blah, 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 blah," all that stereotypes.
Yeah.
3 months later, the same group came in and they were told, "You're Asian. Asians are statistically better at math, da, da, da."
Good.
30% higher scores.
Yeah.
So so it is, so to the mind model thing, it is that making sure that if you believe in helping, and this is to the audience, if you believe in, lifting people up, be that mentor, be that advocate for people, because at the end of the day, that changing our mentality around how we communicate to each other, in my opinion, is going to change the world.
Well
Sorry.
said.
I got a little on a
Stop
soapbox.
stealing my lines.
I got on a soapbox there. Sorry about that. Not
I'm
really.
supposed to be the evangelist. You're supposed to be the negotiator. Come on.
So this has been great, and I just have really enjoyed having you on. How can people find you?
Well, right now I'm under witness protection. Now just you can find me on Instagram at Aquil_Hydrow. And I have a Facebook page as well. That's where
Awesome.
I'm working on rolling out a website. But that's, being an engineer, I'm loath to pay anyone to do it. So in my copious amount of free time, I work on it.
Right, exactly.
But I have lots of other stuff out there on the web from conversations about mostly about rowing and about diversity, equity, and inclusion in rowing. So yeah, just look me up, do a quick search, and you'll find me rambling about all types of things.
Well, I will put that contact information in the show notes so everybody can find you. And again, check out the Hydrow. It's an amazing, amazing piece of equipment to have in your home. It gives you a great workout. And definitely look to follow Aquil. He's just such a great guy. And I just really appreciate this conversation. I hope that you've enjoyed being on the show and learn some things along the way too. I've learned a lot. So thank you very much for sharing. And to all of our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. I can't wait to see you next time on In the Ven Zone, where we work to help you, the small business owner, level the playing field and elevate your negotiations. Ask for more of what you want and expect to get it. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next time. Have a great day, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Ven Zone with Christine McKay. We invite you to visit our website at www.ven.zone to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Empower the negotiator in you and successfully level the playing field. Join us again next time here on In the Ven Zone.